Thanks for tuning into the Dinosaurs Lately podcast, the dinosaur podcast that features periodic updates recapping the latest news on the dinosaurs. My name's Ryan Rogers, and this is the podcast that targets a type of dinosaur and tries to catch you up on everything that's been published on them lately. Welcome to the 11th of these interstitial episodes I've created to keep up with all the dinosaur news, even when I'm not publishing new episodes of the Juras-Sick Park-Cast. I hope it helps you feel up to date. So welcome to episode 11, Eusauropoda, recorded July 27th, 2026. A continued thank you to Christoph Oakes of Snail, S-N-A-L-E. Check out his incredible albums on Spotify and Bandcamp. Snail's third album is out now, and you can find it too on Spotify and Bandcamp, and it's called Toynbee. Today's intro is Eye Patch, and the outro is You Don't Know How Sad I Am, which are from Snail's third album. Before we get into the thick of things I wanted to say, I have a few books I made on Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, and Ankylosaurs, and I'm wrapping up one more based on this episode as well. If you'd like a copy of any of these, just send me an email and I'll forward it over to you. No charge. It would literally cost you nothing to drop me a line and ask for one or all of them. You can reach me at ryansrogers@gmail.com. So consider them a thank you for listening, and I hope to hear from you. Today's episode, we are catching up on Eusauropoda. Let's get started. Eusauropod is a term coined by Dr. Paul Upchurch back in 1995 in the Evolutionary History of Sauropod Dinosaurs published in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B, Biological Sciences. He reviewed a bunch of studies on sauropod phylogeny and compared it with cladistic analyses and reconstructed the sauropod phylogeny. The macroevolutionary story of sauropods at the time was that the sauropods diverged from other dinosaurs in the late Triassic. Cañadón was the most primitive of the sauropods. A radiation of Jurassic Chinese sauropods represented one family of sauropods, the Eusauropoda, possibly indicating that China was geographically isolated during the Early Jurassic. Sister group to these Chinese Eusauropods are the Neosauropods, which include your brachiosaurs and the superfamilies like titanosaurs and diplodocids, as well as the cetiosaurs. Through this grouping, Upchurch had observed that, quote, all sauropods except the volcanodontids formed a monophyletic assemblage, and he needed a term to contain all those sauropods, Eusauropoda and the Neosauropods, which he coined as Eusauropods. The Eusauropoda is diagnosed by numerous specializations, including features in the skull relating to the nares, the skull roof, the jaws, tooth rows, and then more cervical vertebrae expanding from 10 to at least 12, a reduction of finger bones in the hands, probably for structural support, a more robust and short pubis, and fewer toe bones, probably again to support more weight. So in this way, a 1995 family name separates the big famous sauropods from the Sauropodomorphs, which we covered in episode 7 in the fall of 2025. Now, some sauropods are considered Eusauropods, but they do not necessarily fall into the other big famous families like the titanosaurs and diplodocids. They're derived enough to fit the definition of a true sauropod, but they're not yet derived enough to be considered in the more derived families. These middling sauropods are the ones we're focusing on today. According to Dr. Kevin Gomez, who is author to a couple papers in today's episodes, quote, sauropods were the most successful group of sauropodomorphs, a clade whose origins date back to the beginning of the late Triassic, the Carnian, and by the end of the Triassic they had achieved a remarkable abundance and distribution. By the end of the early Jurassic, the different sauropodomorph lineages, mostly characterized by small sizes and bipedal posture, were replaced by Eusauropods of larger size, accompanied by a reduction in skull size, elongation of the limbs, neck and tail, and quadrupedal posture. Our Eusauropod story begins in the early Jurassic in this episode, in this case in Argentina at the Cañadón Asfalto Formation that dates back to around 179 million years into the Toarcian age of the early Jurassic, where we will meet Bagualia alba in our first paper. Osteology of the appendicular skeleton of Bagualia alba from the Lower Jurassic of Patagonia and the macroevolutionary history of early Eusauropods, published in the journal Cladistics in January 2025. Bagualia alba is named after the Bagual Canyon, and alba is Spanish for dawn, making this the early dinosaur from Bagual Canyon, who lived during an early Jurassic global warming event caused by volcanic activity, which decimated the sauropodomorph populations. Bagualia, however, adapted to the newly sprung conifers and plants using its long neck to snip plant matter from them while staying in place, conserving energy with a tooth enamel 7 times thicker than other extinct herbivores. These would contribute it to being much larger than its contemporaries, more than 30 feet long. It was described in 2020 and is one of the earliest known Eusauropods of them all. The sauropods transformed from the Sauropodomorphs from the late Triassic, which were mostly bipedal and not necessarily gigantic, into true sauropods, which were so quadrupedal that they developed columnar limbs and even wound up losing their fingers and toes in the titanosaurs and became the largest terrestrial animals we know of, is well understood. How they transformed is one of those early Jurassic mysteries that would benefit from finding a whole bunch more fossils. Well, paleontologists have Bagualia alba, who provides some data on what these transitional forms look like. So these authors looked into it. Quote, the timing of these changes in the evolution of the group is unclear. Here we describe the appendicular skeleton of an early diverging Eusauropod, Bagualia alba, from the late Early Jurassic of Patagonia, Argentina, and conduct a morphological disparity analysis based on the phylogenetic dataset of Sauropoda. They found a, quote, change in morphospace occupation between pre-Toarcian and Toarcian Middle Jurassic Sauropodomorphs and between the, quote, latter and late Jurassic forms. The first shift appears to correspond with a, quote, extinction of non-sauropodan sauropodomorphs and the diversification of sauropods. This means, as the plateosaurs, mesospondyluses, and jingzhulongs that we learned about in episode 7, sauropodomorphs, were going extinct, eusauropods were evolving for survival. And then once the sauropodomorphs were good and extinct, the eusauropods entered phase 2, exploding into the late Jurassic, where you get your Brachiosaurus, Brontosaurus, and Diplodocus. Or, the author calls it, quote, the diversification of Neosauropoda and closely related eusauropods like Mamenchisaurids, Turiasaurians in the late Jurassic, leading to a substantial shift and increase in morphological disparity. By studying the appendicular skeleton, recall this is the part of the skeleton that relates to the appendages, arms and legs of a dinosaur, of Bagualia, the authors are enlightened with some of the evolutionary stages Eusauropods transgressed during the Jurassic period. The scapula, the authors say, developed a, quote, broad acromial process, and the coracoids, quote, dorsal margin does not exceed that of the scapula, and there were details in the humeruses, the ulna, the ilium, and the pubis, as well as the femur, fibulas, and the pedal unguals, phalanges, and more. Quote, our phylogenetic optimization of appendicular traits shows that the evolution of the sauropod appendicular skeleton is closely tied to increases in body size that occurred well after the shift to obligate quadrupedalism adopted by sauropodomorphs during the late Triassic. So, once they got on all fours, then they really started developing in a way that one might argue the sauropodomorphs, who are partially bipedal still, couldn't keep up with. And these authors definitely make that correlation. Quote, this shift corresponds to the extinction of non-sauropodan sauropodomorphs and the diversification of sauropods. Continuing in the study of Bagualia, our second paper, written by almost the exact same team of authors and also published in 2025, is Contributions to the Sensory Palaeobiology of Sauropodomorpha from the study of the endocranium of the early Jurassic Eusauropod Bagualia alba, that was published in Papers in Paleontology. The authors' ambitions were to perform a paleoneurological study on Eusauropods to complement a body of paleoneurological studies that had been done on Neosauropods before, using digital reconstruction of its brain and inner ear. This study adds an early Jurassic stepping stone along the path of neuroanatomical and sensory changes that occurred between the late Triassic and late Jurassic, which was previously unobserved. So what did the authors find? That Bagualia's pituitary gland was hypertrophied, which the authors suggest is a feature which appeared early in the evolution of Eusauropods. Previous studies had noted that early sauropodomorphs had short and thick pituitary glands, whereas large-bodied sauropods exceeding 10 tons had a marked hypertrophy of this gland, which may indicate that, quote, the appearance of a hypertrophied pituitary may have occurred before the appearance of taxa with massive bodies. Then there were more observations. Quote, additionally, the poorly developed floccular lobe and the shortened semicircular canals of the inner ear in Bagualia, which are dominantly used for balance and eye movement and moving along a vertical axis, may be related to its obligatory quadrupedal posture and columnar limbs, which probably contributed to the low agility in responding to external stimuli, particularly in terms of eye and head movements. So this kind of reads like they wouldn't flinch especially much when presented with, quote, external stimuli. Now, the floccular lobe in Bagualia presents a, quote, strong decrease when compared with Triassic sauropodomorphs, which indicates low agility in response to external stimuli in terms of its eye and head movements. This is a trend that, quote, later culminated in the complete absence in more derived forms, linked to a marked change in the ecology of the group. The paper says high agility in this part of the paleoneurology is usually seen in carnivores and hunters, which you can imagine would need to be nimble and fast to adapt to fleeing prey items, and in smaller bipedal herbivores, which equally needed to be nimble and quick to avoid being caught by predators. Big quadrupedal sauropods didn't run, and they didn't chase. Reminds me of the Ghetto Boys singing "Damn It Feels Good to Be a Gangster."
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster. And real gangsta ass niggas don't run for shit. Cause real gangsta ass niggas can't run fast.
Quote, based on its encephalization quotient, Bagualia has greater brain volume than expected of taxa of similar body size, and this quotient was not correlated with body size in the Sauropodomorphs study. The authors say this often related to cognitive capability and probably indicates the, quote, relative size of the olfactory bulbs used as a proxy to estimate olfactory acuity in dinosaurs. It is inferred that the, quote, sense of smell was important to Bagualia, but not as crucial as in small-bodied funnivorous early Sauropodomorphs from the late Triassic. This may be related to its bulk herbivorous diet. The authors interpret this as a demonstration that, quote, the sensory evolution of sauropods is likely to have occurred gradually and was slower than changes in body mass, with dietary shifts playing a partial role in the long evolutionary history of this group. I guess this is saying their sense of smell didn't need to adapt and improve as they evolved much larger and presumably less picky dietary interests. One of the aspects discussed earlier that heralded the survival of Bagualia over other prosauropods during its age was its adaptability to the environment, and this next article is an extension of that line of observation, niche partitioning. The article Sauropod Niche Partitioning During the Early Jurassic of Patagonia, Argentina, published in the journal Historical Biology in May 2025, explored in what ways sauropods adapted for their ecological niches, in such a way that they weren't competing directly for the same resources. The, quote, the Cañadón Asfalto Formation possesses the largest record of early Jurassic sauropods in South America. From this formation come the sauropods Fulcimeria, Bagualia, and Patagosaurus, and they add that they are, quote, several other as yet unnamed specimens. Fulcimeria and Patagosaurus have been linked together in literature since they were both described in the same paper by Argentine legend Dr. Jose Bonaparte. Fulcimeria is a 35-foot sauropod from Chubut province, who is named after Argentinian paleontologist Wolfgang Volkamer, who did groundbreaking work, no pun intended, beginning in the 1960s, primarily as a palynologist studying fossil spores and pollens, as well as a geologist. Patagosaurus is a much bigger 65-foot sauropod from the same locality, and some of the fossils referred to it may belong to another big sauropod as well. These species are known from fossils, of course, and one of those fossils is PVL 4076, housed at the Paleovertebrados Instituto Miguel Lillo in Tucumán, Argentina, comprised of a premaxilla that was previously interpreted as a Patagosaurus, but this paper observes that it is in fact another big early Jurassic sauropod in Argentina. PVL 4076's broad crown teeth had relatively thick enamel, while Patagosaurus's crowns are thinner with a finer enamel, among other distinct differences, indicating to the authors that this is a different species of sauropod altogether. Quote, the morphological analysis of the teeth of the premaxilla PVL 4076 indicates numerous differences from the aforementioned specimens, and specifically from Patagosaurus. There is no evidence to support the conclusion that these differences are due to different ontogenetic stages of the individual studied or to the differences in tooth position. Therefore, it is highly likely that PVL 4076 belongs to a distinct taxon within the Cerro-Condor-Sur locality. And as more sauropods become identified in this area increases in global importance as a reservoir of early Jurassic sauropods, say the authors. They add, quote, these dental differences within the Cerro Condor Sur locality evidence a niche partitioning mediated by different feeding strategies, thus allowing the coexistence of these large animals during the late early Jurassic of Patagonia. Why do they all have different teeth? The authors say this indicates that, quote, they may have fed differently on vegetation and therefore a niche partitioning existed during the late early Jurassic in Patagonia, which favored the coexistence of both taxa in a same environment. Our next article continues speaking about Argentinian sauropod dental patterns with the article Dental Replacement Patterns and Morphological Diversity in Lower Jurassic Sauropods from the Cañadón Asfalto Basin, Patagonia, Argentina, published in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology in January 2026. This paper is so similar that it has the same authors who are working with similar specimens as the last article, but publishing not on niche partitioning, but instead on dental patterns and what they may further infer. In this case, giant herbivores required teeth to feed, and those teeth had to operate efficiently or else these big giants couldn't eat efficiently, and for something that was so big it needed a lot of food that was certainly a death sentence. This paper says, quote, herbivores have developed various mechanisms to cope with dental wear. One such mechanism was an increase in the number of replacement teeth and in the rate of tooth replacement. And you'll recall earlier, we had an article where the enamel of the teeth was so much thicker than the prosauropods, probably because you didn't want to lose any teeth, right? You can't afford to lose teeth. This mechanism has been studied, but not specifically in early sauropods, which is what this episode of the show is all about. So this paper describes, quote, the dental replacement patterns of 5 sauropods from the Lower Jurassic of the Cañadón Asfalto Basin in Patagonia. The familiar Bagualia and Patagosaurus are included in this study, along with 2, as of January 2026, formerly unnamed specimens, MACNCH934 and MPEFPV12010, and another Eusauropod, Amygdalodon patagonicus. Amygdalodon was named back in 1947, and it's named after its amygdala. Instead, it's amygdala-shaped teeth. You'll remember your amygdala is named after it being shaped like an almond. Oh yeah, so this is a 40-foot-long sauropod with teeth shaped like almonds. Perfect for a study on sauropod dentition. Upon comparing all these specimens, our familiar crew of authors found Patagosaurus had teeth with thinner crowns of fine enamel and without marked apicobasal grooves. Amygdalodon and MPEFPV12010 had up to 2 replacement teeth for each functional tooth, and Bagualia, MACNCH934, and possibly Patagosaurus had up to 3 replacement teeth in their jaws ready to go. The replacement rates differed too. Patagosaurus and MACNCH934 showed the highest values correlating to their distinct dental morphology, suggesting, quote, the existence of diverse feeding ecologies among the studied taxa. So, Eusauropods demonstrated, quote, increase in enamel thickness, quote, compared to basal forms such as Mosasaurus and Amygdalodon. And Patagosaurus had the most distinctive morphology among these dinosaurs, and in the late Early Jurassic, sauropods showed a, quote, increase in the number of replacement teeth, with Bagualia representing the earliest evidence of this increase. A higher tooth replacement rate is inferred in Patagosaurus, equivalent to Bagualia, and Patagosaurus's comparatively thinner enamel thickness may suggest it ate, quote, more abrasive vegetation. The other animals studied had more robust teeth with thicker enamel, which correlates with, quote, tougher vegetation. This implies, quote, distinct feeding strategies likely facilitating niche partitioning and the coexistence of multiple large-bodied herbivores at the end of the early Jurassic in Patagonia. Put all of this together, and this research shows that sauropod niche partitioning was in place by the late early Jurassic, which aligns with the observations in studies of later, more derived neosauropods during the late Jurassic and Cretaceous. Okay, moving along into the Middle Jurassic, we have our next article called A New Eusauropod Dinosaur from the Lower and Middle Jurassic Wangmen Formation of Ningming County, Guangxi, South China, published in Acta Geologica Sinica in August 2025. In this article, they name a new dinosaur, Huashanosaurus kini, based on a partial skeleton recovered from a bed in the Lower to Middle Jurassic Wangmen Formation of southern China. Huashan refers to the Huashan Mountains in Guangxi province, and Sauros, of course, is Greek for lizard, and Kini refers to Jian Qin, who first reported the fossil site, so making this Jian Qin's lizard from the Huashan Mountains. While Jurassic sauropods are well represented throughout China, especially in provinces like Yunnan, Sichuan, Chongqing, and Xinjiang, and then represented less well in provinces like Gansu, Ningxia, Anhui, Tibet, and Guizhou, the Jurassic fossil record of sauropods in Guangxi is categorically poor. So putting something on the record in this time and place may have warranted its naming, even if it's not substantially much of a fossil. The holotype NHMG034093, housed at the Natural History Museum of Guangxi, was uncovered from the Wangmen Formation. It's comprised of a disarticulated partial skeleton, including one incomplete dorsal centrum, an incomplete dorsal rib, part of the left humerus, part of the ulna, a manual phalanx, an incomplete left ilium, part of the femur, part of the fibula, and an incomplete metatarsal 5, and an incomplete pedal ungual. A second specimen was named a paratype associated to the holotype called CRAN0001, housed at the Cultural Relics Administration of Ningming County, which includes 4 caudal vertebrae, 2 caudal neural spines, and a pedal phalanx. So not much more to work with, but work with them they did, and after piping these remains through the phylogenetic analysis machine, the authors found that Huanshansaurus places near the base of the Eusauropoda, more derived than the Amygdalodon, and closer related to Patagosaurus, ultimately most closely related to Mamenchisaurus and Omayosaurus, which are known to be late Jurassic sauropods of China. Mamenchisaurus is a highly derived sauropod of the late Jurassic with the longest neck you ever saw. with a 50-foot neck and 19 absurdly large neck vertebrae and an overall length exceeding 100 feet. It was a long, strange animal. Omayosaurus was no slouch either, maybe 70 feet long in its own right, so Huashanosaurus might have been a long animal if it's as closely related to these mamenchisaurids as it's believed to be. Had there been more fossils, or any of these fossils had been better preserved, surely a more reliable position on the chart would be made, but until then, it's just considered a basal Eusauropod. The discovery of Huashanosaurus fills in a gap in sauropod palaeoecology of the lower to mid-Jurassic Guangxi province of southern China, and its discovery, quote, provides additional information to understand the evolutionary radiation of Eusauropods in China and indicates that the Wangmen Formation is probably of early to middle Jurassic in age. The next article also introduces a new dinosaur from the early Jurassic, this time from the Gansu province in northwestern China. The Eusauropod Jinshuanlong Naidu is named after the Jinshuan region and the Mandarin word for dragon, as well as Ni, which means nickel, and Du, which is Mandarin for city, making this Jinshuan's Nickel City Dragon. And I like the sound of that. The holotype JCMF0132, housed at the Jinshuan Museum of Fossils, was uncovered from the Xinhe Formation. It's comprised of an associated partial skeleton, including a nearly complete skull with mandible, the 5 cervical vertebrae, 29 articulated caudal vertebrae, some fragmented caudal ribs, and some hymal arches, which are the chevrons you find on the underside of tail vertebrae. What makes Jinshuanlong distinct are, quote, several cranial and postcranial autapomorphies, and it's important for helping, quote, elucidate the evolution of sauropods in East Asia, providing, quote, further evidence of the diversity and biogeography of the clade during the Middle Jurassic. There's a lack of, quote, fusion in some of the bones, so it's believed this specimen may have been a juvenile, possibly. Its skull is like barely 30 centimeters long, so this may not have been a very big sauropod, though the estimates I've seen are still like 30 feet long. This makes at least 5 non-Neosauropod and sauropod lineages existing in the Middle Jurassic of East Asia, and a recent study suggests that at least 2 different types of body plans and 3 morphological types of teeth could be distinguished with, quote, morphological and body size variations that may explain the coexistence of these animals and high niche differentiation from the same area. The authors add that this, quote, relatively high diversity of East Asian Eusauropods in the Middle Jurassic may reflect an increasing shift to habitats and niche differentiation in this period. This may have been accelerated by geographic barriers or changes in ecosystems, quote, between basins, which may have enhanced, quote, the differentiation of Eusauropod genera, such as the prosperous lineages in the Sichuan Basin during the Bajocian and Bathonian, which are Jurassic eras. The authors add, quote, the high rates of morphology, diversification, and distribution of Eusauropods in these areas may indicate East Asia as a potentially important origin region of some sauropod clades. Ultimately, this new discovery contributes to the story that Eusauropods were prominent in the Middle Jurassic of China, where they found great success by niche partitioning across a variety of ecosystems, which likely served as a springboard to their greatest heights during the Late Jurassic and into the Cretaceous. The next article is the first Turiasaurian sauropod from East Asia, published in the Zoological Journal of the Linnaean Society in February 2026. This study reveals that the first Turiasaurian sauropod from East Asia, as the title suggests, and further evidence contradicting the East Asian isolation hypothesis. Rather than being isolated in Eastern Asia during the Middle Jurassic, paleontologists have recently been revealing, quote, diverse Middle Jurassic sauropod assemblages in East Asia, including mamenchisaurids and other Eusauropods and Turiasaurians, bridging the transition to Neosauropods. In this paper, they name a new sauropod that is potentially the first Turiasaurian. Its name is Yantalong Linai, where Yanta is Mandarin for wild goose tower, referring to the historical locality, and Long is pinyin for dragon. Linny honors Professor Wenxun Lin for his contributions to Chinese economic history and his support for paleontological research in Yunnan. So this is Professor Lin's Yanta dragon. This animal may have been small for a sauropod, though it, quote, probably represents a mature individual. The authors say, quote, the size of this individual is remarkably small, with the longest centrum measuring only 15 centimeters in length and the tallest vertebrae reaching 40 centimeters in height. These dimensions are smaller than those of Mamenchisaurus, Omayosaurus, and Diplodocus. The scale bar in the paper suggests around a little less than 15 feet long, significantly smaller than the big guys in the later Jurassic. The paper studies the bananas out of these 6 presacral vertebrae. They detail those things coming and going, which is great when you run these fossils through the phylogenetic analysis machine. And the results are that this Eusauropod falls in the Turiasaurian category. Turiasaurians were erected as a Spanish clade of sauropods in 2006, and they showed that non-neosauropods could be enormous too. Of course, as was already said, this Chinese fella is not big, and looking at the phylogenetic tree, this would be the first Turiasaurian known from China as well. The authors say, quote, "This new discovery probably represents the first report of Turiasauria in East Asia, which increases our understanding of the morphological diversity within sauropods." That word probably sneaks in there for some reason that they don't describe. Maybe there's potentially Turiasaurian fossils kicking around, just waiting to jump in and spoil their fun that they're, I guess, preparing for. I don't know. But they throw probably in there for fun. Or for some good reason. I just don't see what it is. Or it could be that their phylogenetic analysis was limited to only a small handful of presacral vertebrae, which they comprehensively analyze. Quote, "Pending the discovery of more complete material, the phylogenetic analysis position of Yantalong cannot be determined with high precision." Quote, "Nonetheless, the current evidence is most consistent with its interpretation as a basal Turiasaurian taxon forming the sister clade to Neosauropoda, an assignment we favor over alternative placements." They add, quote, "The presence of Yantalong in the Middle Jurassic of East Asia suggests a continuous regional history for Turiasauria. Its close relationship to Neosauropoda further validates the inference that Neosauropods had achieved considerable diversity and a broad distribution by the early Middle Jurassic." Quote, "In short," no pun intended, right? "The discovery of Yantalong further undermines the East Asian isolation hypothesis, implying a substantially higher yet largely unrecorded diversity of Middle Jurassic sauropods, which is likely to be masked by considerable sampling biases." The next series of articles are all recently published, and they're all adding more and more data and more evidence to the theme that's already recurring throughout this episode. Eusauropods succeeded by niche partitioning, and they continue to have a broader geographic range than previously recorded. A lot of these papers relate to discoveries which would have been in the Bajocian age, about 170 to 168 million years ago. In the article, "A New Turiasaur Specimen from the Middle Jurassic of India," published in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology in April 2026, the authors say that the, quote, "early history is poorly known for Eusauropods." In this article, they report, quote, "a lower middle Bathonian Turiasaur tooth from western India." You recall from our stories about Bagualia and other Eusauropods of Argentina that Eusauropods had many differences in their teeth, and that indicates distinct niche partitioning. In this case, the more derived Turiasaurian Eusauropods had distinctive heart-shaped teeth, quote, "typical of Turiasaurs." This mere tooth doesn't warrant enough material upon which to erect a new genus of species, but it is special. The tooth is the, quote, "oldest occurrence of the clade in the Indian subcontinent, approximately coeval with the oldest known Turiasaurs elsewhere in Gondwana, advancing our spatio-temporal understanding of sauropod diversity in the Middle Jurassic." That kind of means they existed in more geographic places over a longer period of time than had been previously recorded. The next article, "Teeth from the Middle Jurassic of Morocco revealed the oldest Turiasaurian sauropods from Africa," published in the Acta Paleontologica Polonica in August 2025, finds spatulate teeth with diagnostic, quote, "heart-shaped crowns identified as Turiasaurian in Morocco." Quote, "Turiasaurians have not previously been described from the Elmers III formation, and the only named sauropod from the Elmers group which lacks preserved teeth is the dubious taxon Cetiosaurus maghrebiensis. Due to lack of overlapping material and its lack of clear diagnostic characters, we refrain from referring these teeth to the latter and identify them as a Turiasauria indeterminate instead. These teeth represent the first definitive Turiasaurian remains from Morocco, as well as the geologically oldest occurrence of Turiasauria from mainland Africa. Once again, a tooth isn't enough to name a new species or genus after, but in this case, the authors argue that this discovery improves the value of the Elmers III rock formation. As previously demonstrated by the co-occurring Ankylosaurus spicomelus after and the Stegosaurus adriticlict bulafa and Thyreosaurus atlasicus, the Middle Jurassic Elmers III formation of Morocco is vitally important for documenting the early radiation of biogeographic history of many dinosaurian clades. Spicomelus is an awesome and odd ankylosaur discovery we haven't yet covered on the podcast. Adriticlet and Thyreosaurus are stegosaurs we covered in episode 10, Stegosaurs. Not only are early diverging and informative thyreophorans being uncovered from this formation, but significant early diverging Eusauropods too. Quote, "Middle Jurassic terrestrial faunas are globally poorly represented, making the fauna of the Elmers III formation critical to our understanding of the establishment of these famous late Jurassic faunas." And this observation has been reaffirmed throughout this episode. Every time there's a Middle Jurassic discovery, it's expanding the known universe of everything it touches. That's because this Early Jurassic and Middle Jurassic time is poorly represented in the fossil record, and almost every new discovery, no matter how fragmentary, is valuable, or in these authors' words, quote, critical and, quote, vitally important. Switching into the Late Jurassic. Moving from the Middle Jurassic and into the Late Jurassic, especially the Cambrian age, we begin to find some of the most famous sauropods like Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, and Brachiosaurus, though those are all neosauropods, not eusauropods like the Turiasaurians. The next article, Dental Microwear Texture Analysis Reveals Behavioral, Ecological, and Habitat Signals in Late Jurassic Sauropod Faunas, published in the Journal of Nature Ecology and Evolution in October 2025. The Eusauropods, like Turiasaurians, are described as part of this article. The authors are studying, quote, 3 late Jurassic faunas from the USA, Portugal, and Tanzania, each approximately 150 million years old, which are known for their extreme sauropod diversity. These 3 paleo-environments had similar, quote, taxonomic composition, but the major clades, quote, differed in relative abundance, and their, quote, depositional strata record distinct climatic regimes. The authors use, quote, dental microwear texture analysis to investigate the impact of these climate regimes and the resulting food availability on the different sauropod taxa. They found that Chimaerasaurid macronarians showed, quote, minimal variation across different climate regimes, which supports the suggestion that these animals, quote, migrated to follow their preferred climate niche and food source. This is similar to the Portuguese Turiasaurs, which did not exist in the Jurassic of North America. In this case, where Chimaerasaurids and Turiasaurs co-occurred in Portugal, quote, their microwear patterns are distinct, suggesting niche differentiation to avoid ecological competition between these two clades. The author's findings are mostly referring to neosauropods, but it does reveal that Chimaerasaurids of Portugal could have migrated into Turiasaurian regimes, but not entered into direct ecological conflict thanks to niche partitioning, or niche differentiation. And while that previous paper did not recognize any Turiasaurians in the Morrison Formation when considering their co-occurrence with Chimaerasaurid macronarians, this next paper acknowledges that there is indeed some evidence that they occurred there too. In the paper, The First Evidence of Turiasauria in the Upper Jurassic Morrison Formation, published in the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science Bulletin 102 in January 2026, heart-shaped tooth crown appears again to argue for a broader spatiotemporal distribution for Eusauropods. The brushy basin member of the Morrison Formation in Colorado possessed some teeth that, quote, indicate the presence of the first reported member of Turiasauria from the late Jurassic of North America. The authors say, quote, this suggests that the group dispersed to North America prior to the early Cretaceous and that the group might have survived the Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary in the region. The teeth are referred to specimens FHPR 18687-A, A through H, and they are housed at the Utah Fieldhouse of Natural History State Park Museum, and they're comprised of laboratory casts and respective molds of 8 tooth crowns from various parts of upper and lower jaws, all based on original teeth found associated and in a small area hypothesized to belong to a single individual. If the phylogenetic analysis is correct when comparing these teeth against other teeth, they both resemble Turiasaurus and Lazellosaurus, which are both Spanish Turiasaurians, making this a probable Turiasaurian found far from its relatives. This has several significant, quote, potentially far-reaching implications, say the authors. First, a previously unrecognized sauropod clade was present in the Morrison Formation. Second, the oldest occurrence of probable non-Neosauropoda within North America, depending on the placement of Turiasauria and the eventual affinities of Dystrophaeus. And third, it could change how early Cretaceous sauropods in North America are believed to have come to be. Whereas there was an extinction event ending the Jurassic period, which ultimately ended the Diplodocids, some sauropods survived and are known from the early Cretaceous. Until discovering a Turiasaurian in North America, it was believed early Cretaceous Turiasaurian remains would have had to have migrated into North America after the end Jurassic extinction. But if Turiasaurs were present in North America in the late Jurassic, then they may have been endemic to the region, and their presence can be explained without a post-Morrison dispersal from Europe, and thus a different lineage. So their origins might be reimagined thanks to this tooth, these teeth found in the Morrison Formation. So Eusauropods. To recap, our first paper said that according to a review of Bagualia, the springboard to the sauropods' evolutionary trajectory launched, quote, well after they fell into obligate quadrupedality. And it was after that point that they went on to survive to the end Cretaceous extinction event, whereas the bipedal sauropodomorphs were extinct by the Early Jurassic. Upon reviewing Bagualia's paleoneurology, it provides an insightful glimpse at the transition between late Triassic sauropodomorphs and the gigantic late Jurassic sauropods. In this case, it would appear that they got bigger. Their response time and sense of smell decreased in importance as these animals grew from big to enormous. The prosauropods of the late Triassic go extinct in the early Jurassic, and Eusauropods seized the reins thanks in part to their adaptability. We had an article from Argentina that described how Argentinian Eusauropods of the early Jurassic were embracing niche partitioning, specializing in ecological niches so that they were not in direct competition for limited resources. The study said animals like Bagualia, Patagosaurus, and Volchymeria, as well as other unnamed specimens, all show that they had distinctly different teeth, interpreted as different diets, indicating that their dietary adaptability of early Jurassic Eusauropods could be a key feature that led to their global domination throughout the late Jurassic and continued survival into the late Cretaceous. The following article extended the observation made in late Jurassic and Cretaceous sauropods on their dental records and how they indicate that giant herbivores succeeded by staying out of each other's way through niche partitioning. The authors found distinct differences between the teeth of Bagualia, Amygdalodon, Patagosaurus, and two yet unnamed fossils from the late early Jurassic of Argentina, and it shows that this niche partitioning was already in place by that point in time, extending the macroevolutionary known time span of sauropodan niche partitioning. The story of niche partitioning, biodiversity, and Eusauropodan success continues in the Middle Jurassic, especially in China, where two new species are named, Huashanosaurus and Jinshuanlong. Their discoveries both provide additional information to understand the evolutionary radiation of Eusauropods in China. And part of that greater understanding is the further disassembling of the East Asian isolation hypothesis. A new Pterasaurian sauropod, Yantalong, is the first to be described in East Asia, but it's coming as less of a surprise because the growing picture of sauropods during the early and middle Jurassic is that they are geographically dispersed and ecologically diverse, going back many, many years. New discoveries are strengthening the interpretation that there was a substantially higher, yet largely unrecorded, diversity of Middle Jurassic sauropods in East Asia. While teeth aren't a lot to name a species after, they are great for identifying what type of animal something belongs to. Many animal species are named after their teeth, or lack of teeth, Pteranodon. And so when teeth are found, what family of animal they belong to can be narrowed fairly easily. And because teeth are covered in enamel, the strongest biological element an organism can grow, they survive for millennia and the fossilization process quite nicely, making them abundant for paleontological research. And that's why so many papers in this week's episode have been focusing on teeth. They're plentiful and informative, overcoming one of the greatest barriers in paleontology, that there's a scarcity of fossils. It's helped identify that there were likely Pterasaurians in hereto unreported places, at hereto unreported times, like the Middle Jurassic of Western India, the Middle Jurassic of Morocco, and the Late Jurassic of North America. Finding these teeth expands when the Eusauropods are understood to have arrived in various localities across the globe and reveal other interesting details. For example, dental wear analysis shows that Pterasaurians and Camarasaurids in Portugal could coexist thanks to niche differentiation when Camarasaurids migrated, or that early Cretaceous Pterasaurians might have been endemic to North America, having survived the end Jurassic extinction event. But ultimately, the story of Eusauropods is that they evolved a vital and inheritable adaptability to diversify their feeding and adapt to their niches, a trait which helped them survive while sauropodomorphs of the early Jurassic went extinct, and coexist to keep from competing for the same resources. Thanks to this adaptability, sauropods diverged into yet uncounted diversity throughout the millennia, becoming some of the most successful terrestrial herbivores the Earth has ever known. All right, after all that, I hope you feel like you're more caught up on what's been published on Eusauropods lately. Thanks for tuning into the Dinosaurs Lately podcast. If you'd like to find links to the materials discussed on today's show, you can visit dinosaurs-lately.blogspot.com, which is a companion piece to the Dinosaurs Lately podcast. A special thanks to everyone who tunes in, to Beckett, Hector, Dr. Yaming Wang, Dr. Francisco Costa, and to Ben Chrysler at the Dinosaur mailing list for all of their contributions that makes wrangling all these news stories possible. Remember, I have a PDF on Ankylosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, and I'll have one based on this episode too on Eusauropods. And if you'd like a copy of any of that, just send me an email and I'll forward it over to you at no charge. And how can you do that? Well, listen up. Dinosaurs Lately is a companion show to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the podcast where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park, and also not about that too. If you'd like to be a guest on that show, you can reach me at ryansrogers@gmail.com. These podcasts are part of the Spring Chickens banner of amateur intellectual properties, including the Spring Chickens Funny Pages, Tomb of the Undead graphic novels, the Second Lapse graphic novelettes, the Inventory, and the worst of them all, the King Street Capers. And you can find links to all that baggage in the show notes by visiting the schickens.blogspot.com, and you can connect and follow on Facebook at facebook.com/springchickencapers, on YouTube by searching for the Juras-Sick Park-Cast podcast, on Tumblr at Mr. Rogers22, on X at RogersRyan22, or on Blue Sky at RogersRyan22.bsky.social. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you feel like you're more caught up on Eusauropods for now. Until next time.